Hi, Jonas Kane here, and welcome to Positivity Now, the show that believes that the good life can be achieved by focusing on being positive. In past episodes, we've talked about what positivity is, as well as what positivity isn't. So in today's episode, we're going to focus more on applying positivity to our lives. In fact, I was recently on a morning radio show, and the host of the show asked me that same question. She asked, how do we apply positivity to our life? What she meant was, are there any techniques or best practices, tools that we can use? So I proceeded to tell her the story of the time I drank hydrochloric acid live on stage during a magic show. Now, that's a story I told a couple episodes ago. But that story highlights what psychologists often refer to as the psychological immune system, also sometimes used interchangeably with what's called emotional resiliency. And the psychologists Daniel Gilbert and Timothy Wilson did a series of studies in 1998 that highlighted this phenomenon. One of them was they interviewed a series of assistant professors at a university, and they asked them how they would feel if they got tenure. If they asked them if they thought they would be happy a few years later, and they all, of course, said, of course they'd be happy if they achieved tenure. When they re-interviewed these same professors, some of them had gotten tenure, some of them had not. What they found out was that both sets of professors, those who got tenure and those who did not, they were just as happy. So this highlights that sometimes what we think will bring us happiness will not be as big of a contributor to our own happiness. So they did a follow-up study. They took pairs of individuals, and these individuals had never met before, but each pair was told an embarrassing story about the other person. And then they were asked to evaluate the other person's personality based off of that embarrassing story. And then they were asked how they would feel if they had to work with the other person, knowing that the other person evaluated them poorly. And of course, when they were told that they were going to have to work together with people who they evaluated poorly, they thought they wouldn't like it. They thought it would not make them happy. They thought it would be a negative experience. But surprisingly, when the people did actually work together, they found that those who actually worked together experienced more positive experiences. They were happier with the results. Now, this surprised them because you would think it would be the opposite. You'd think you would not like to work with people who think unfavorably of you. But this again highlights the psychological immune system, our resiliency to avoid things that cause us pain. Not so much putting up walls, but a way to get over ourselves and experience positive experiences despite everything that's going on around us. Now, what these psychologists suggest then is that what we think we want versus what will really lead to a happy life or a good life can sometimes be at odds. So what they suggest is that we should account for the psychological immune system when making decisions, because surely sometimes what we want is going to be better than what we're trying to avoid, but sometimes what we want isn't really in our best interest. Now, I'm going to get into that in the second half of this episode, but I also want to highlight something else that the psychologists might have missed in this study, and it's the idea, it can perhaps best be expressed in a riddle. And it goes like this: when you see a goose, what do you see? Now, I'm going to give you my answer in a moment, but perhaps after this story, you will come up with the answer that I'm looking for. I recently visited Kauai, the island of Kauai in the Hawaiian Islands. And I stayed in this park with this beautiful canyon, 3,000 feet deep, lush green trees, blue waterfalls extending in the distance, bright red volcanic rock. This thing, it's known as the Grand Canyon of the Pacific, Waimea Canyon. And what struck me about this place was that it took 3 million years for this canyon to be created. 3 million years. I mean, when I don't finish something in 5 or 10 minutes, I start to get antsy because I think, okay, when is this going to be done? When I want something, I want it done now. But 3 million years. Now, there's a few things that we can walk away with this one lesson. Certainly, grand things take grand time. But what I'm trying to get at here is that this canyon would not exist today if not for 2 things. Number one, Mount Waliali. And what's known as the Waimea River today. Waterfall 3 million years ago, coming down off of Mount Waliali, coming down flowing into what became this river. Over a period of 3 million years, a period of erosion, formed this beautiful, beautiful canyon. So what it required was teamwork. It required working together. And I think that's perhaps something that was sort of glossed over in the earlier study of the people who had to work together versus those who did not work together. Working together, they experienced more positive experiences. And I have a little magic trick that will highlight this a little bit more. Take a look. A lot of the first magicians were actually more aligned with being scientists because they used the techniques of science in nature to create apparent miracles. I'm going to show you an example that's kind of a magic trick, but it's also really more of a science experiment. And the idea is if you have a glass of water and you take a note card, this is my note card. And if you press it onto the top of the glass, the air pressure builds up inside the glass that I should be able to turn the glass upside down. And if I do it just right, hopefully it won't leak too much. And the note card stays in place. It's because of the teamwork between the air pressure in the glass and the pressure of the water. It holds that card in place. Now, this is a neat science trick, but that's not what I wanted to show you. This is what I wanted to show you. If it builds up just right, I can create the illusion of magic by removing the note card. And if we do it just right, the water should stay suspended in the glass. See if it works. And that's the magic of teamwork. And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that magic trick. I now hope you understand the answer to the riddle. What do you see when you see a goose? Now the answer I'm looking for is geese. Think about it. Whenever you've seen a goose, or at least whenever I've seen a goose, I've never just seen just one. I always see geese. They're never apart from their gaggle of family and friends. Now, what I believe this suggests is that our own happiness, our own good lives will be supported by our family, our friends, our community, our coworkers, society working together towards a positive outcome. Now, that's one thing that's very important, but a lot of people say, but Jonas, how can we all work together when we have all these different perspectives, all these different viewpoints? And that's a fair point. In fact, whenever I'm teaching a class, I often start off by saying, we're all gathered here in the same room for the same purpose, but we're all coming from different places. And yet, even though we're all gathered here for the same purpose, we're all experiencing something different. Now, of course, we can't help that. It's because of all the different perspectives from which we're interpreting the events around us. Now, if anyone wanted to leave the room, they could, because then they could experience something different. If they don't like what they're experiencing, they could just leave the room. But sometimes you can't leave the room. Sometimes you have to stick with the situation. Now, in cases where you can't leave your situation, you can, of course, still change your experience by changing your perspective. I often do a quick experiment with my students where I show everyone one at a time, I show everyone an image on a card, and I ask them to come up one at a time. I show them the image, and I ask them to write down in one word their first reaction of what they see. And then I collect all of the answers, and it's often very revealing because I'm looking for one of two answers. Sometimes I get multiple answers. I'm going to show you the image now, and think about what your answer would be, your first reaction, your first response. What do you see? Now, of course, depending on how you look at this image, most people will say they see a duck, right? A little duck bill, a duck tail. Some people, however, they say they see a rabbit. Rabbit ears here, rabbit tail there, right? Little nose there. I've had some other interesting answers. One person said they saw yellow. I think they were describing their emotions, maybe. I don't know. But duck or rabbit are the most common. But that's the idea. We're all coming from different places. How we interpret the symbols around us is going to be different for everyone. That can make working together difficult. However, it can also help us if we try to foster the right kind of perspective. This is what I have in mind. The comedian Stephen Wright, one of my favorite comedians, he puts it well when he says, sometimes even when you lose, you actually win. This is what he has in mind. He says, kind of like when you play a game of musical electric chairs. That's a game you don't want to win. So the idea being, whenever we find ourselves in a situation, maybe we're working with others, we're struggling, we're not getting our way with things, what I'm suggesting is that we work to foster the right kind of perspective. We'll be able to see if what we've been after is actually really in our best interest. We'll be able to see if this game we've been playing is really a game of musical electric chairs. The author Napoleon Hill puts it another way when he says that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you can be the best thing for you, so long as you don't let it get the best of you. Now, this positive mental attitude approach is certainly very easy to be said, harder to put into practice. However, I know from personal experience that if we work on this and follow through with it every day, it will reveal a whole new world to us. It will reveal hidden meanings to the events around us. 10 years ago, it was the summer of 2007, I was working at a restaurant in East Windsor, Connecticut, a La Notte restaurant. And my job at the restaurant was to go table to table performing magic for the guests. What my real job was to distract the guests from the fact that their food hadn't arrived yet. Perspective, right? But in this one particular evening, I was performing magic at this one table when there was a commotion on the other side of the room. So everyone, all of the attention went over there, and there was this elderly couple, and the woman was choking on her food. And she was able to cough up her food, so she was fine. But she was visibly distraught about this. So when I finished performing at the table I was at, I went over to her table to distract her from what was happening. And I didn't perform any magic for her, but she did share with me her story. She said just a couple weeks earlier, she was sitting in the same restaurant, sitting at the same table, and on that day, she also choked on her food. Now, I stopped her right there and I said, Miss, you know, if you want to eat at this restaurant, you might want to sit at a different table. She didn't think it was funny, but she ignored my interruption and attempt at humor and continued her story. She said that on this particular day, she couldn't cough up her food. She said that she could not breathe. At one point, someone from the bar had to come over and perform the Heimlich on her, and he just kept pounding and pounding at this frail 80-something-year-old woman. It just kept pounding at her. And her husband told me that at one point, her face, her skin began to turn gray. And perhaps before it would have been too late, finally, she was able to cough up her food and breathe. Now, at this point, of course, the owners of the restaurants were they were freaking out, so they had called the EMTs. Now, the EMTs arrived, and even though she could breathe fine, they still brought her to the hospital, fearing that the gentleman may have broken some of her ribs while he was trying to save her. When she got to the hospital, she told me that the doctors didn't find any broken ribs. But what they did find was an aneurysm that was about to burst. This is someone's grandmother, probably someone's great-grandmother, 80-something years old, and it was just not her time to go. They had this terrible near-death experience not happened, she surely would have died. Perspective. It can be said that there's nothing good about tragedy, that it's better to be happy than in sadness, better to be at peace than in chaos. But just as choking on a piece of food can have a greater meaning for our lives, so too can tragedy and sadness, and all have a greater meaning, so long as we're willing to look at it from another perspective. I hope you've enjoyed these stories. I hope these techniques have proved helpful to you. My name is Jonas Kane, here with Positivity Now. I would love to hear from you. I get questions all the time from people, so if you have your own question, or perhaps you have a story that you would like to share with us, please visit jonaskane.com/positivity, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as I can and maybe have you on our next show. My name is Jonas Kane. I'll see you next time. Stay positive.